The story of Gerald Cotton's demise sounds like something out of a movie. One day he was the youthful CEO of Canada's biggest cryptocurrency exchange, and the next he was reportedly dead overseas, taking to the grave all the secret keys to a digital fortune. For tens of thousands of investors, that nightmare scenario became reality. His sudden death left $169 million in cryptocurrency and cash inaccessible, and customers were in shock. As the case unfolded, it became clear that this may not have been the tragic end to a visionary entrepreneur's life, but rather a story of deceit, fraud, and voluntary disappearance. Gerald Cotton was a Canadian cryptocurrency entrepreneur known as the co-founder and CEO of Quadriga CX, which was at one point the country's dominant Bitcoin exchange. Born in 1988, Cotton grew up in Ontario and graduated from York University's business program, where he developed an early interest in digital currencies. In 2013, he teamed up with an associate, Michael Patron, to launch Quadriga, a cryptocurrency exchange platform. Cotton became the public face of the company, projecting an image of a friendly, tech-savvy innovator on a mission to make crypto accessible to Canadians. He marketed himself as a friendly blockchain wizard with a genial demeanor. He was also active in the community, serving as a director of the Vancouver Bitcoin Co-op and hosting local Bitcoin meetups to champion the new technology. The crypto boom of that period made Cotton very wealthy. He acquired luxury items like a sailboat, multiple high-end properties, an airplane, and even a private island. After its founding, Quadriga quickly grew to become a major player in Canada's cryptocurrency market. At its height, the platform boasted around 350,000 users and saw about $1.2 billion worth of Bitcoin traded in 2017 alone. To put this in perspective, Bitcoin was only a few years removed from being traded on a Magic the Gathering online exchange by that point. Or should I say, something that originally started out that way at the very least. Cotton ran the business largely from his encrypted laptop, and by 2016 was essentially running it single-handedly, with no other full-time employees or directors involved. On the surface, Quadriga appeared to be thriving. However, behind the scenes, it lacked proper financial controls and had growing liquidity problems. For instance, a Canadian bank once froze about $25 million of Quadriga's funds in 2018 due to uncertainty over who really owned the money. Still, users remained largely unaware of any issues and continued to entrust their money to Quadriga right up until after Cotton's fateful trip in late 2018. In December 2018, Cotton traveled to Jaipur in South Asia with his new wife, Jennifer Robertson, for a honeymoon that doubled as a charitable visit. The couple planned to visit an orphanage and donate supplies to children. Super charitable of them. And yeah, even through my deadpan delivery, I'm hoping you could detect the sarcasm in my voice, because things are about to go seriously off the rails. Just days into the trip, Cotton fell ill with sudden stomach pain and was admitted to a local hospital on December 8, 2018. He was diagnosed with acute gastroenteritis that rapidly escalated to septic shock. Within roughly 24 hours, on December 9th, the 30-year-old went into cardiac arrest and was pronounced dead. The official story was that Cotton died from complications of Crohn's disease. The gastroenterologist who treated him later said he wasn't entirely sure about the diagnosis and was haunted by how quickly Cotton's condition spiraled out of control. Cotton's body was quickly embalmed and flown back to Canada, and a local death certificate was issued. No autopsy was conducted, and stranger still, Quadriga didn't immediately inform its customers of Cotton's passing. It was only on January 14, 2019, more than a month later, that the company announced Gerald Cotton had died from Crohn's complications in a foreign land. As soon as Cotton's death was disclosed, panic set in among Quadriga's users. It turned out that Cotton was the only person with the passwords and recovery keys for Quadriga's funds, and now those digital wallets were inaccessible without him. Roughly 169 million Canadian dollars worth of Bitcoin and other assets were effectively frozen on the platform, affecting around 75,000 customers. The exchange soon halted operations and filed for creditor protection by the end of January 2019. In fact, during the weeks before the death was made public, Quadriga's website still accepted deposits. This was suspicious because withdrawals had quietly stopped because the only person who could execute them was already dead. This infuriated customers and further deepened the mystery. For many, this was more than just an online drama. It was a personal financial catastrophe, as some lost their retirement savings or children's college funds in the freeze. It didn't take long for doubts and conspiracy theories to swirl. Cryptocurrency observers were baffled that a CEO like Cotton had no contingency plan for access to the exchange's assets. Even those who knew him were astonished. One blockchain security expert noted that Cotton understood the need for backups and would never leave everything to chance, making the lack of any plan B extremely hard to fathom. However, what would come out later would explain why old Jerry didn't take these basic security precautions. But hang tight, because I'll come to that in a moment. The circumstances of his death abroad also raised extreme suspicion. Cotton had signed a will just days before his trip, leaving his $10 million estate to his wife, and even setting aside $100,000 for his 2 dogs. Yet that document curiously made absolutely no mention of any passwords or crypto wallets for Quadriga's funds. Of course, creating the will just before the trip was also a suspicious act as well, though initially it was explained away by his new marriage. In addition, his death-related paperwork from overseas had peculiarities. His name was misspelled on the death certificate, and the hospital executive who signed his documents had a prior fraud conviction. On Reddit and Twitter, some aggrieved users openly speculated that Cotton might have faked his death and vanished with the money. Authorities and the crypto community alike set out to investigate. Initially, many assumed Quadriga's predicament was just a worst-case scenario of poor succession planning, essentially a one-man business where the keys died with the king. However, as inquiries proceeded, a far more sinister reality began to emerge. In early 2019, Canadian courts declared Quadriga bankrupt and appointed Forensic Accounts as an independent monitor to trace any remaining assets. Law enforcement agencies also opened probes. Meanwhile, armchair detectives scoured the blockchain, the public ledger of transactions, to follow the trail of Quadriga's holdings. They discovered something alarming. Some of Quadriga's so-called cold wallets, offline reserves, were empty, and large sums had been moved out months before Cotton's trip. In other words, much of the money was already missing, rather than simply locked away waiting for a password. The deeper investigators dug, the stranger the story became. Journalists uncovered that Cotton's co-founder, Michael Patron, was actually a convicted fraudster who had changed his name from Omar Danani after serving time in the States. Cotton's own past was also scrutinized, revealing that he had dabbled in dubious online investment schemes as a younger man. By late 2019, with still no recovery of the missing cryptocurrency, lawyers for Quadriga's users even asked authorities to exhume Cotton's corpse. In June 2020, a report by the Ontario Securities Commission finally provided definitive answers. The OSC concluded that Quadriga collapsed because of fraud committed by Gerald Cotton. Essentially, Cotton had turned Quadriga into a Ponzi scheme in its final years. He secretly siphoned off client assets for personal use and made reckless trades with customer funds. When his bets went wrong or cryptocurrency prices fell, he covered the losses using new deposits from other users. By the time of his death, the exchange owed about $215 million to its users, but the money was largely gone. Cotton had also drained approximately $24 million for personal expenses and lost about $115 million through bad trades and mismanagement of user assets. Only a small fraction of the funds was ever recovered. Roughly $34 million was eventually found and paid back to customers. Cotton's widow denied any knowledge of the scam and ended up voluntarily turning over all the money she had received from his estate. In the end, Quadriga was a case of deceit and financial wrongdoing hidden behind the hype of a crypto platform. Cotton's body was never exhumed, and it remains unclear if this cryptocurrency fraudster remains out there somewhere in the world or not. Personally, I think the entire thing sounds a little bit too convenient to be taken at face value. Hey everyone, Jimmy here with a reminder to like and subscribe and check out the Patreon. Also, don't forget to search for Lazy Chill True Crime wherever you listen to podcasts and follow me there for even more content. On December 5th, 1872, the crew of the British brig Dei Gratia spotted an unguided ship drifting about 400 miles west of Portugal's Azores Islands. As they drew closer, they were astonished to recognize the vessel as the Mary Celeste, a merchant brigantine that had left New York City for Europe but never arrived. Captain David Morehouse knew the Mary Celeste had departed New York 8 days ahead of his own ship, making it baffling that she had not yet reached any port. When a boarding party from the Dei Gratia climbed aboard, they found an eerie scene. The Mary Celeste was completely deserted, yet still seaworthy and intact. The crew's personal belongings were undisturbed, and a 6-month supply of food and water remained neatly stored. The ship's charts and papers were scattered about below decks, as if the crew had left in a hurry. The cargo of almost 2,000 barrels of industrial alcohol was untouched, aside from a few barrels that were mysteriously empty. However, the ship's only lifeboat was gone, and one of the pumps had been disassembled on deck. About 3.5 feet of water sloshed in the hold, a worrisome but not catastrophic amount. There were no signs of violence or fire. The 10 people who had embarked on the Mary Celeste, Captain Benjamin S. Briggs, his wife and young daughter, and 7 crewmen, had vanished without a trace. The Mary Celeste was a sturdy 2-masted merchant ship, originally launched in 1861 under the name Amazon, before coming under American ownership and Captain Briggs's command. In early November 1872, Briggs set sail from New York Harbor, bound for Genoa in Italy, carrying a hold full of denatured alcohol. The Atlantic crossing was difficult, and the ship battled heavy weather en route. According to the last log entry, dated November 25, 1872, the Mary Celeste had reached a point just shy of the Azores. That entry gave no hint of anything amiss, yet sometime between that date and December 5th, the crew apparently abandoned ship. When the Dei Gratia encountered the vessel, her sails were ragged, and some lines were dangling loosely, suggesting she had been adrift and unattended for several days. The crew of the ship brought the Mary Celeste to Gibraltar, where British authorities held an inquiry into the baffling incident. Investigators found no evidence of mutiny, piracy, or foul play that could solve the riddle. The inspector leading the investigation suspected some sort of foul play, but after months of examination he could prove nothing amiss. The court later even entertained wild possibilities. One was that perhaps the crews of the Dei Gratia and the Mary Celeste had somehow engineered the incident as part of a fraud scheme, but nothing came of these suspicions. In the end, The salvagers received only a modest reward, and the mystery remained unsolved. Reports of the ghost ship Mary Celeste quickly spread, capturing public fascination with the idea of a perfectly fine modern vessel found inexplicably empty on the high seas. In the absence of an official explanation, a slew of theories emerged to fill the void, and early speculation focused on the specter of foul play. One of the most lurid ideas was the suggestion that perhaps pirates had attacked the Mary Celeste and slain everyone on board, leaving her adrift. This was a narrative that could send newspapers flying off the shelves, but it didn't hold up under any meaningful scrutiny. This idea didn't fit well with the facts. Piracy in those waters was rare, and the ship's cargo and valuables were still intact. The final raids by the Barbary pirates of North Africa had taken place over 40 years prior to the Mary Celeste, and in essence, the waters were essentially absolutely pirate-free. Further, these waters were heavily trafficked by both civilian and military vessels, so one-off instances of piracy were extremely unlikely. Another rumor blamed a mutiny or drunken rage, the crew supposedly tapping into the alcohol cargo and turning on the captain, but this too was implausible. The alcohol was industrial, and the crew were experienced, trustworthy men, not likely to mutiny without cause. Further, they weren't exactly in bad conditions, and were well compensated. Simply put, none of the traditional elements that could foment a mutiny on board a ship were present. With human treachery seeming extremely unlikely, people looked to more extraordinary events. Some speculated that a disastrous natural incident could have forced the crew to flee. For instance, some suggested an underwater seaquake might have violently shaken and stirred the ship. Others suggested a sudden waterspout could have been responsible. Still others suggested that a rogue wave could have slammed the vessel with water. Notably, while rogue waves are a scientific fact now, prior to the first measured rogue wave in 1995, they were considered nautical folklore. Suggesting a rogue wave in the 19th century was nearly on the level of suggesting that a ghost did it, in terms of scientific credibility. Others pointed to the volatile cargo itself. Perhaps alcohol fumes built up and led the crew to fear an imminent explosion. Notably, 9 of the barrels were found empty, and those were made of red oak, a wood more prone to leaking alcohol vapors. It's conceivable that Captain Briggs, smelling fumes or hearing alarming noises from the hold, ordered everyone into the lifeboat as a precaution in case of a blast. Beyond these scenarios, even wilder ideas took root in the imagination. Some claimed attacks by giant sea monsters were responsible, and later stories have claimed alien abductions to explain the disappearance. In fact, I found a picture of a book released in 1981 that has the Mary Celeste being hit with a water spout and a giant tentacle while traveling in the Bermuda Triangle. It also looks as though it may have been struck by a rogue wave, and it's also watched over by an alien. Modern investigations have steered toward a more straightforward explanation that doesn't require sea monsters or aliens or any form of intrigue. The leading theory today is that Captain Briggs abandoned ship in a desperate but honest attempt to save lives after misreading a situation that wasn't actually fatal. Several pieces of evidence point to this scenario. The ship's sounding rod, for measuring water in the bilge, was found on deck, as if left out after a frantic check of the hold's water level. One of the pumps was discovered broken and inoperative, suggesting the crew may have struggled to remove water from the hull. The Mary Celeste had undergone a major refit not long before, and it's believed debris or coal dust from an earlier cargo might have clogged the pump system. Thus, although there were only about 3 feet of water in the hold when found, Briggs may have had no way to gauge the situation accurately and feared his ship was flooding uncontrollably. Some researchers also theorized that the ship's chronometer was faulty, making Briggs think they were closer to land than they really were. And for those who didn't know, like myself, a chronometer is a precise marine timepiece used to determine longitude at sea. By comparing Greenwich Mean Time to local time, navigators calculate their east-west position accurately. We know the ship was, in fact, nearing Santa Maria Island in the Azores on November 25th. If Briggs expected to see land earlier and didn't, he might have worried that they were off course or in escalating danger. All these factors combined, rough seas, a possibly explosive cargo, a malfunctioning pump, and uncertainty about their position, could have driven Briggs to a dire decision. He may have ordered everyone into the lifeboat, hoping to temporarily evacuate until whatever threat was facing the ship passed. Tragically, once off the Mary Celeste, the crew never made it to safety. Perhaps the tow line to the lifeboat snapped, or a wave swamped the small boat, leaving the people stranded at sea while their ship, relieved of its human cargo, carried on without them. This scenario, while unconfirmed, fits the best available evidence and has become the most widely accepted explanation. It casts the incident not as a violent crime or supernatural event, but as a tragic misjudgment. By all accounts, Briggs was a capable and cautious captain. He would not abandon his ship unless he truly thought she was doomed. In this case, he seemingly acted to preserve lives, only for that action to doom everyone in the lifeboat. Despite countless attempts to unravel it, the fate of the Mary Celeste's crew remains an open question. No final log entries or purported survivor stories have ever surfaced to provide closure. Interestingly, the Mary Celeste itself survived its infamous voyage and sailed under new owners for another dozen years. Unfortunately, this wouldn't be the last time the Mary Celeste would dominate the headlines for all the wrong reasons. In 1885, the ship met a questionable end when a disgruntled captain deliberately ran it aground on a reef in Haiti in an attempted insurance fraud. The scheme failed, and the battered ship was abandoned to rot in Haiti. This subsequent event again made people look at the owners of the ship and consider the potential for insurance fraud the first time around, but nothing came of it once again. The Mary Celeste is a story that has been retold and embellished for over 150 years, yet it never seems to lose its grip on our imagination. Personally, I'm a big lover of maritime mysteries, and this is one I would love to see solved one day, even though I know it'll never be definitively cracked. The Codex Gigas, famously nicknamed the Devil's Bible, is a colossal manuscript created in the early 13th century in Bohemia. It's renowned not only for its size, but also for the breadth of its contents, and the mysterious full-page portrait of the devil found inside. It's also famous because the entire massive tome is believed to be the work of one single scribe, a fact that's been mostly confirmed by modern analysis. The Codex Gigas contains an entire Vulgate Latin Bible, but it's much more than a Bible. The remaining pages include many other works that together make it a miniature library of 13th century knowledge. It features two extensive histories by Flavius Josephus, a collection of medieval medical texts known as Ars Medicinae, and the Chronicle of Bohemia by Cosmas of Prague. In addition, the Codex incorporates various shorter texts, including a calendar of saints, various rituals, and even a few incantations intended to ward off evil. Most famously, one page is devoted entirely to a large color illustration of the devil. The documented history of the manuscript is as fascinating as its content. It was created in the Kingdom of Bohemia, in what is now the Czech Republic, sometime between 1200 and 1230. According to an entry on its first page, the earliest known home of the manuscript was the Benedictine monastery of Podlajice in Bohemia. This was a relatively small and poor monastery, which makes it unlikely that such an immense and resource-intensive book was produced entirely within its walls. Nonetheless, the Codex Gigas was treasured there. However, by the late 13th century, the monastery fell on hard times. In 1295, the monks pawned this great tome to another monastery, the Cistercian Abbey in Sedlec. It was soon repurchased for the Benedictine monastery at Barovnov in Prague that same year. Its fame had already grown substantially, and medieval sources described the Codex Gigas as one of the wonders of the world. Over the following centuries, the Codex moved through the hands of those who valued rare books. In 1594, Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II, an avid collector of curiosities and occult items, quote-unquote, borrowed the manuscript. He transferred it to his castle in Prague and evidently never intended to return it, since the Codex remained in this Prague collection until the turmoil of the 30 Years' War, long after his passing. In 1648, as Swedish forces conquered Prague at the war's end, the Codex Gigas was seized as part of the spoils of war and taken to Sweden. From 1649 onward, this Czech treasure resided in Stockholm, becoming part of the Swedish Royal Library, established with the help of loot from this conflict. Sweden would end up as the Codex Gigas's forever home, but its presence there was not uneventful. On May 7, 1697, a great fire broke out in Stockholm's Tre Kronor Castle, which housed the Royal Library. In a dramatic rescue, someone saved the Devil's Bible from the flames by throwing it out of a window to the ground below. The hefty book survived, though according to one report it landed on a bystander and severely injured them. Following this close call, the manuscript was moved to a secure location. On New Year's Day, 1878, it was officially transferred to the National Library of Sweden in Stockholm, where it's been kept ever since. In modern times, the manuscript has occasionally traveled on special exhibit and even made its way to the Czech lands for a short period in the 21st century. In 2007, it was loaned back to Prague for several months, drawing large crowds eager to see the legendary Devil's Bible return to its place of origin after nearly 400 years. No account of the Codex Gigas would be complete without the eerie legend that clings to its origin. According to medieval lore, the manuscript was created by a single monk under extraordinary circumstances, with the help of the devil himself. The story goes that a Benedictine monk named Herman the Recluse broke his monastic vows and was sentenced to a particularly harsh punishment. He was to be walled up alive inside the monastery, perishing of hunger in complete darkness. Desperate to save his life, he promised that in one night he would create a book that would glorify the monastery forever, compiling all human knowledge into one volume. According to the lore, the abbot of the monastery agreed to these terms and said that if he could actually do this, he would be spared. So Herman, the reclusive Benedictine monk, immediately got to work. As midnight approached and the enormity of the task became clear, the panicked monk allegedly prayed not to God, but to the devil himself. In exchange for his soul, the devil agreed to aid him and finish the manuscript in a single night. With this infernal help, the monk miraculously completed the entire book by dawn, inscribing the full Bible and all the other texts at supernatural speed. To seal the pact, the devil left his likeness in the book, which became the large famous portrait of Satan himself on one of the pages. Thus, the giant tome gained the sinister nickname, the Devil's Bible, since people believed no mere mortal could have created it without diabolic assistance. While this origin myth is both famous and chilling, unsurprisingly, it has no basis in historical fact. It likely arose as an attempt to explain the awe-inspiring achievement that the work represents. The idea that one person could produce such a massive and comprehensive book alone seemed unbelievable to medieval observers, so a supernatural story took hold. In reality, analysis of the handwriting indicates the manuscript was indeed the work of a single scribe, but over a far longer period. Experts estimate it would have taken at least 20 to 30 years for one person to write and decorate all the pages with such care and consistency. In other words, it likely represents the life's work of a devoted monk who labored for decades. We don't know the name of this scribe for certain, but the script strongly suggests it was one individual, and it was signed Herman the Recluse. Some have speculated that this isn't the name of the scribe, since one of the primary virtues of the Benedictine order is humility. It's been speculated that Herman may have been someone who the scribe was close to, like a mentor or perhaps a close friend. Notably, the Devil's Bible also presents another mystery beyond its authorship. The manuscript initially contained 320 sheets, but for reasons which are unknown, 12 of these sheets have gone missing. There's been significant speculation about what could have been contained on these sheets, though at least one of them is known to be the start of the book of Genesis. Legends have popped up around what was contained in these pages, with myths unsurprisingly focusing on the potential that something of occult significance was contained within. Beyond the myths, the Codex Gigas stands as a culturally and historically important artifact. It's a snapshot of 13th century knowledge and belief, encapsulating religious scripture alongside history, science, and even rituals, all in one book. The inclusion of so many diverse texts under a single cover is extremely rare, making it a kind of medieval encyclopedia. This suggests it was intended as a one-stop reference for a monastic library, meant to educate readers with a broad range of information, from the sacred to the mundane. Artistically, the Codex is significant for its scale and craftsmanship. Large illuminated Bibles were not unheard of in the period, but the Devil's Bible is exceptional even among these for its dimensions and the ambition of its creation. The full-page devil portrait remains unique in medieval art. While depictions of Satan existed elsewhere, no other known Bible features the devil taking up an entire page, standing alone as a symbol of evil.